Chapter 4, Out of the Darkness. When Ken awakened about 8 o'clock the next morning, he felt as though he were ascending slowly out of a dark pit. Mercifully, the mocking voices and the hideous images seemed more memory than reality, and faded away as the room in which he found himself came steadily into clearer focus. The sun was slanting in through a large window to his left. Its welcomed rays were glinting from a metallic apparatus standing just to the right of his bed. He had difficulty turning his head far enough to see it clearly, but the realization slowly dawned that it was an intravenous pump and that it was connected to him. I'm in the hospital. The thought seemed impossible to connect with himself. How did I get here? What happened? He had a vaguer recollection of leaving his lab and driving his car somewhere, but beyond that, everything was blank, no matter how he struggled to remember. In utter exhaustion, he gave up trying to understand for the moment and just lay there staring at the ceiling and trying to get back in touch with his body. A dull, throbbing pain seemed to envelop him. He could move his right arm, the one with the IV in it, but his left arm and right leg seemed to be weighted down. Lifting his head up slightly, with great effort, he could see that those limbs were encased in casts. Ken became aware that someone was moving around near the head of his bed, just out of his line of vision. "So you're awake," said a pleasant feminine voice. "How do you feel this morning?" "I'm trying to figure that out. I'm not sure this is really me. How did I get in here?" "I'm afraid your car went over a cliff. You were more dead than alive when they brought you in." Now the nurse came into view and stood there looking at him with obvious empathy. "A cliff? Really? I don't remember being near any cliffs." Ken tried to adjust his position and groaned at the pain. "Was anybody with me? Anybody else hurt?" "No, I don't think so." "When did it happen?" "This is your 4th day in here, and the first time you've been conscious. You don't know how lucky you are. You've improved so much in the last 10 hours. It's just incredible. I'm going to slow the IV and see if you can take some clear fluids. The doctor's moving you along as fast as you can go." The nurse reached for the controls. "I'm going to raise your head up a bit. There. Now let's see how this goes down." It was painful swallowing at first. After several swallows, however, the pleasant liquid with a slight lemon taste went down smoothly and seemed to soothe his throat. He managed most of the glass, then lay back exhausted. As he dozed off, he heard the nurse's voice drifting through a fog. "I'll be back soon. We're going to move you out of intensive care to another room." "How's the miracle patient doing today?" At the sound of the enthusiastic voice, Ken turned his head painfully to see a white-garbed physician bursting exuberantly into his room. The lean, energetic man, looking much younger than his 56 years, seemed to take in Ken's entire situation at a glance. It was obvious that he was pleased, very pleased, with what he saw. "Doing? I'm plotting my escape. That's what I'm doing," retorted Ken, managing a wry smile. He was propped up in bed and drinking from a glass of water that he was holding with his one good hand. "When do I get out of here?" "And what do you mean by miracle?" "Well, you are on the mend. There's no better medicine than a good sense of humor," said the doctor, ignoring his questions for the moment. "I can see we're going to have to tie you down." Elliot stood there for a moment, grinning at his patient approvingly. At last he said quietly, "A miracle, my friend, is something that only God can do, and you're it." The tall, wiry figure bent over the hospital bed to lay a hand gently on Ken's good shoulder. "By the way, I'm Dr. Harold Elliott. You can call me Hal. I'm the director of trauma surgery. My assistant and I tried to put you back together the other day." "Were you able to do it?" asked Ken, eyeing with interest the tousled black hair with streaks of gray and the intense but kindly face so near his own. He glanced at his pain-racked body. It looks like you had a lot of mending to do. Seriously, doctor, what's the prognosis? Yesterday, practically hopeless. Today, excellent. Complete recovery. And that, my friend, is one of the biggest miracles I've ever seen. Boy, are you ever hung up on miracles. The luck of the Irish is what I'd call it. Elliot let out a short, good-natured laugh. The luck of the Irish wouldn't even come close to what you needed. And you can't argue with me because you weren't even conscious and don't know what happened. And that's what we've got to work on a bit. Starting from right now and going back in time, tell me what you can recall. Touché. End of discussion. Bing, bing, bing. You're not a doctor, you're a bulldozer. Ken decided he was going to like Elliot. What do I recall? Well, it hasn't been exactly what you'd call partying it up. Just average run-of-the-mill hospital fun and games. His eyes met Elliot's, and they both laughed. The resultant pain brought a sharp moan from Ken. The nurse just took my IV out and moved me in here from wherever I used to be and promised me something a bit more solid for lunch. She said I'd run my car over a cliff. Do you remember that? Elliot interrupted. I tried, but so far, well, I can't remember any of it. Do I have amnesia? Hardly. You told the nurse your name and address this morning. Temporary loss of a small time segment. Nothing to worry about. What you and your car went through was horrific and just as well forgotten, but that's not the worst of it. What's the last thing you remember before it all goes blank? Ken shook his head slowly. Well, I remember driving somewhere in the coastal range, but it's vague. I don't know whether it led up to this accident or whether I'm just remembering something earlier. I used to drive up there a lot. It'll help if you try to think where you were when you got into your car. I was trying to remember that when you walked in. I think I was at the lab with my associate. And I don't have a good feeling about whatever happened there, but I don't know why. And I'm sure it's irrelevant. Irrelevant? You think so? Elliot's tone became very serious. That's what put you in here. If you hadn't gotten involved in psychic research, you wouldn't be lying in that bed. Doctor, with all due respect, you don't know what you're talking about. As a matter of fact, I do. Your associate, Frank Layton, called the hospital yesterday, concerned about your condition. Insisted on talking to me. You were still in a coma. He said he'd been involved with you in psychic research. When I asked him about contact with spirit entities, he tried to change the subject. Why would you ask that? You know why. Anyone as deeply involved as you've been with either drugs, mysticism, or psychic phenomena, and you've been into all three, is bound to have made contact with spirit entities. Ken smiled wearily, and there was now a new respect for Elliot in his voice. So you do know a bit about my field. You've been playing with fire for a long time, said Elliot. I followed your research and exploits in the papers, and you finally got badly burned. What I want to know is how much you remember about trying to contact so-called highly evolved extraterrestrial intelligences. I think you're playing games with me, responded Ken testily, suddenly wary of Elliot. Frank wouldn't give out information about our research. I'm not trying to get at your secrets, said Elliot. I'm trying to help you remember what happened when you made this contact. It's very important. Ken hesitated for a moment. Okay, he said at last, but I'm going to chew Frank out for this. Yes, we were trying to make contact, and all I can remember is there were these voices in my head, not like my own thoughts, but from somewhere else, and audible. It's hard to explain. He fell silent. Layton didn't tell me, said Elliot matter-of-factly. Ken stared at him. Then how did you find out? And why did you say my research put me in here? Why? His eyes pleaded for an explanation. Dr. Elliot's belt pager was beeping. He said a few words into his cell phone, then turned back to Ken. "Excuse me," said Elliot. "I've got some other patients to see, and anyway, you need to get some rest before we talk anymore." "I'm not letting you off the hook, Doctor. You made some pretty strong statements that I want clarified, okay?" "You can count on it. I'll get back here this afternoon, and then we can talk some more. In the meantime, have a good sleep."